Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live from the Green Space today, and we have filled the Green Space audience for today's show with WNYC sustaining members. Our fall pledge drive starts tomorrow, and we're kicking things off with a big challenge. By 7 o'clock tomorrow night, we need to get 1,500 people to become sustaining members. If we do that, we'll unlock a $100,000 matching gift from one of our board members. We're getting a head start on the challenge today. I'm not going to mention it over and over again like a pledge drive day, so we're just saying right now we invite you and we hope you will call 888-376-WNYC, 888-376-9692, or go to WNYC.org to make your sustaining gift right now. That means instead of one lump sum, we just take 1/12 of that from your credit card each month. That's all a sustaining membership is. And if we get 1,500 people to do that by 7 o'clock tomorrow, one of our board members will give us an extra $100,000 for showing that we have a lot of public support. Also, quick program note, WNYC will air the New York City Public Advocate debate tonight from 7 to 8 o'clock on 93.9 FM and AM 820. I will be moderating that debate along with Errol Lewis from New York One, the New York City Public Advocate Letitia James, the Democratic incumbent, versus the Republican challenger J.C. Polanco. Errol Lewis and I moderating the Public Advocate debate live here tonight on WNYC at 7 o'clock. Now we continue our October series, A People's Guide to Power, Real Estate Edition. With elections coming up in New York and New Jersey, we're asking what unbalanced power relationships make housing so unaffordable in greater New York, decade after decade, or at least contribute to that, even as every New York mayor announces historic affordable housing programs, and every New Jersey governor comes with a plan to get property taxes under control. We're doing segments on these things throughout the month of October here on The Brian Lehrer Show, A People's Guide to Power, Real Estate Edition. Jessica Gould from the WNYC News team has been digging around on the question and discovered a few things, and she is here now. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
Along with a major player in the industry, Jolie Milstein, President and CEO of the New York State Association for Affordable Housing. This is the trade association that represents developers who build affordable housing, both for-profit and not-for-profit developers. Deputy Mayor Alicia Glenn told us Friday that 2/3 of what they call affordable housing is being built by for-profit developers, about 1/3 by not-for-profits, and that ratio is controversial. The not-for-profits and some affordable housing advocates say the for-profit developers skew affordable housing construction toward the higher end of the subsidized income range, leaving the most housing-needy New Yorkers behind, and that the net effect of for-profit development, even with some affordable units included, is gentrification and the displacement of current residents that comes with it, neighborhood after neighborhood. So that's the critique. Let's hear what the top representative of the industry that represents both sectors, for-profit and not-for-profit, has to say. Ms. Milstein, thanks so much for coming in. Welcome to WNYC.
Thank you very much. Longtime listener, happy to be here.
And first of all, how do you represent both the for-profit and not-for-profit affordable housing developers right now? They seem to be fairly pitted against each other at the moment.
It would seem that way from the press coverage, but in fact, what distinguishes developers isn't so much for-profit versus not-for-profit. I think it's more experience and net worth that really, real estate's a very capital-intensive business. I think that there are for-profit and not-for-profit developers. I was a not-for-profit developer before taking this job, so I speak from some experience. There's capable developers in for-profit and not-for-profit, and I don't think that's really what distinguishes developers, at least in New York City.
How many members does your group have, and how many in each sector?
We have about 350 members. We're a statewide organization, so I don't know the exact number of not-for-profit versus for-profit. It's different in New York City versus upstate, but we have a fairly robust representation of not-for-profit developers in both New York City and across the state.
And what's an acceptable margin for a for-profit developer to make? What's the minimum expectation for them to
I-
be willing to invest?
I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that both for-profit and not-for-profit developers respond to the programs that New York City offers to to produce affordable housing in New York City with New York City subsidy or New York State subsidy. So what happens in the world of affordable housing in our city and our state is government offers subsidies and programs that target different incomes and have different parameters for underwriting, and developers respond to those RFPs. So it's really not something that's determined by the developer in terms of what the underwriting looks like. They do their best effort to respond in a competitive environment.
So no numbers to give, like they would crunch it and see, oh, if we can't make a 6%, a 16% return on our investment, a 26%, whatever it is, then it's a no-go?
I think Jessica's talked to a number of developers who might be able to answer that question. I've never done that investigation of our for-profit or not-for-profit members. But again, the city's trying to encourage, there's a housing crisis. And so the city and the state and the federal government are all putting programs and money out there to try and address the crisis.
Sure. So what the developers need to see as a return in order to build is obviously a key factor that the city wants to take into account to encourage as much development as possible to ease the housing shortage. Jessica, what do you want to add?
So one thing I do want to say is a lot of the nonprofits that I've talked to are concerned about the way NYSAFA represents the for-profit. So while you do have, as you mentioned, membership that includes both, I think it's only fair to reflect the fact that there are a lot of nonprofits who feel like your membership skews more for-profit and advocates on behalf of that industry, and they're concerned about losing a market share of the development to the for-profits. And as Alicia Glenn said last week, two-thirds or two-thirds plus of the development is going to these for-profits. And I just want to underscore what the larger question here is, which is the development of affordable housing has become kind of the centerpiece of the debate about affordable housing. So everybody lauds the goal that the mayor has about building more affordable housing. The question that has been asked and is being asked loudly at hearings and at community boards is this affordable housing affordable enough for the people who live in the neighborhoods now to stay in the neighborhoods? The de Blasio administration says that they need to construct more, and they're trying to address that problem, but some people criticize them as accelerating it. So in answer to the question, I believe that the development fee is between 10% and 15% of the project cost, which can add up to tens of millions of dollars. And the argument that the nonprofits have made to me is that they often, and more often, put that money back into the project to lower the threshold for how affordable it is so that more people can afford it at the lowest income levels. Whereas the developers who are for-profit, understandably, to support their business model, take that and it's their profit. So that's the debate that is going on. And it may seem technical, but it's really about how affordable the affordable housing is.
And do I understand you have a clip of somebody who represents the nonprofit sector or an activist group that wants to encourage the nonprofit sector?
Right. Well, Jonathan Weston represents New York Communities for Change. I know Jolie and Jonathan
Don't always see eye
to eye. But his concern is about how affordable the affordable housing constructed by these for-profit developers is.
NYSAFA claims to be building affordable housing, but in reality, a lot of the projects they do are majority luxury housing, and the affordable housing that they develop in communities is unaffordable for the neighborhoods that they place them in, thereby gentrifying the communities where they are developing.
And my guest on stage is Jolie Milstein, President and CEO of NYSAFA, or the New York State Association for Affordable Housing, along with WNYC development reporter Jessica Gould. Ms. Milstein, what's your response to that speaker and the arguments that Jessica was laying out from those advocates generally?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, I can understand why that would be a concern for people. And I don't agree that most of our developers build a preponderance of luxury housing. That's just not who our members are. I believe that most of our developers are responding other than the 421A redo, which is a separate program. We're not really focusing on that here, but
A certain kind of tax subsidy.
which is a tax subsidy that encourages the creation of affordable housing along with market rate housing as a cross subsidy to just increase the supply. Again, we're in a housing crisis. Our developers, both not-for-profit and for-profit, are responding to the programs that the city, state, and federal government decide upon. So when you respond to be in a competitive pool to develop these projects, you're not getting to decide who lives there and in what incomes. That's something that the program describes for you when you respond to that. Having been a not-for-profit developer, I don't understand when people say they're putting their fees back in to make it more affordable. That's not how the underwriting works in my experience. I think people who are in a not-for-profit environment tend to be mission-driven, and at least in our case, some of the developer fees go to supporting the mission of the organization. But really, the underwriting is not something that a developer, for-profit or not-for-profit, is really driving. Those are program pieces that the city or the funding source describes for you.
So I would say that, first of all, the city articulates a similar position that you have, which is that it's an affordable housing crisis. We need all resources marshaled to address it. So for-profit and nonprofit. And that there are good nonprofits and there are not as good nonprofits, and there are good for-profits and not as good, and that they're deciding on the merits. There is a report that an organization called ANHD is releasing today that shows that at least in the first 2.5 years of the de Blasio administration, which includes some, I believe, Bloomberg-era projects, the lowest income housing was built more by nonprofits than for-profits. But I think what also is at play here is a discomfort that a lot of New Yorkers are feeling with the idea that at a time when homelessness is spiking and the affordable housing crisis is so deeply felt by everyone in this city, that there are people who are making money, and in some cases, a good amount of money, from this industry.
Well, I think that, NYSAFA is on the threshold of launching a whole campaign to build awareness about what the housing crisis looks like. Because I think unless you understand that half of the renters in this city, in fact across the country, are rent burdened, and I think it's almost a third pay more than half their income in rent, you understand then that this is a problem across the city and not just for the very lowest income, although that is important, and I used to work addressing specifically that issue. The mayor's just put another $1.7 billion of capital into addressing the very lowest income. Unlike many places across the country, we have a program targeting just, Ella, the very lowest income. So I think the administration is aggressively addressing that. But you can't ignore the working people who also can't afford to live in this city. And if you don't build mixed income projects across the city, you're going to continue to concentrate poverty. And I just also want to point out that we believe building these mixed income projects expands the pie. That we're not redistributing, we're really expanding housing at all income levels of affordability. And that's very important, and making sure we don't hollow out the city. If school teachers, firefighters, people who work in hospitals, people that work all throughout the service industry in New York City can't afford to live here, which is happening very aggressively and accelerating, we're going to have a much larger problem. Concentration of poverty is not what we want.
Audience here in the green space, if anybody has a question, you can raise your hand. Listeners on the radio or people watching the video stream at thegreenspace.org, you can call up 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692. Did I see a hand up over here? Okay, right there. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Susan. I guess there's something that seems a little, unreal about not seeing how the current mix of housing that's being built would not lead to gentrification. Maybe I need more specifics, but if I believe it's 2/3 are going in at market rate, those are people with a lot of money, and it just leads to different types of stores and different types of, how would that not change a neighborhood?
And to put a little finer point on, or additional point on that, if the mayor's mandatory inclusionary zoning pertains mostly to getting higher, more dense buildings approved, and frequently it's 25-30% affordable for 70-75% market rate, if most units in a development are market rate, then doesn't the neighborhood simply become more unaffordable on balance than it was the day before, to the audience member's question?
I think what the audience member, Susan, right? Thank you for the question, and I think that's an excellent question. And I think that question is really addressing the redo of 421A, which is not the programs that's really more a real estate board of New York issue, because that's a different segment of developers that are building that. That's not what our members typically are building. We're building projects that are mostly 100% affordable housing. And that other tool that uses density and an increase in density to try and bring some affordable housing, if we didn't have that happening, what would happen is you'd probably get the 70% of market rate housing and no affordable housing. Because the choice there is developers building all market rate or getting to build a little bit more market rate and substantial amount of affordable. But again, that's not the programs that we're here to talk about today, because that's not, or at least not with me, because that's not my area of expertise.
Because the rezoning, and Jessica, I think this is a frustration for a lot of people and something people don't understand. The rezoning only applies to buildings that people own that they want to build higher on than they're able to build today, and that's when the city has some leverage to ask for any percentage at all. If that was not in place, then all the units that currently exist there could go to market rate, right?
I believe that we are talking about the rezoned areas and also the housing that is subsidized by the city right now. Is that right?
I'm sorry.
So there's affordable housing being built in all these different ways. Rezoning is one of them. Then there's city subsidies and federal subsidies that go into affordable housing projects. And the de Blasio administration's 78,000 units built and preserved so far towards 200,000 units is what we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a call right now. We're going to go to line 3. Jordan in Greenpoint. You're on WNYC. Hi, Jordan. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
What's your question?
It's more a comment, really, but I just wanted to comment on what I feel is a bit of a hopeless situation. I'm a bit of a pessimist about it. I'm a real estate agent in North Brooklyn, and from what I see, from my perspective, the developers are really not working if they're not pulling, a minimum of 25% net. The amount of money that they have grown accustomed to making is simply enormous, and they have gotten the momentum and the leverage to basically, ensure that, this is their rate, or they won't work. And it's a bit of a catch-22, as I see, or better yet, a feedback loop. They're not doing the work if they're not making an extreme amount of money. And it seems like the market just seems to carry this inertia forward. And I also want to make another comment real quick. I'm going to sneak it in. What is luxury housing anymore? What are we defining as luxury housing? Because I'm in these condos all the time.
What do you define it as?
That's a discussion.
As a real estate agent, what do you define it as?
I'm honestly not sure. It's become a meaningless term to me. What I see called luxury housing is an apartment with a bedroom and a living room and a dishwasher. And
The living room is a luxury these days. It's true.
I think we need to keep an eye on where that goal line is and where it's moving and where it's moved from. Because we're talking about luxury housing versus non-luxury housing. And no offense to any of you, but all I'm hearing is gibberish, because it's a meaningless term at this point when a penthouse with, 1,500 square feet of outdoor space is luxury housing, and a 550 square foot one bedroom apartment that has a washer and dryer in the unit and I don't know.
Well,
maybe
if
a, okay-looking
if
counter
luxury
is also
housing,
luxury.
even if it's that simple an apartment, it's only affordable to the top relatively few percent of New Yorkers, right?
From what I see, absolutely. I mean, I'm in North Brooklyn. I'm in the belly of the beast, and a bit of Bushwick, Bed-Stuy, and now I'm seeing it in Ridgewood. But there's listen, we'll sell a closet with a dirt floor for $400,000. So, you tell me.
Thank you for lifting the veil on some of that. We appreciate it.
I think it's an important moment to talk, maybe defining terms, because at least, and I'm not going to go to describing what's luxury in New York City especially, but I think when we talk about affordable housing, at least in the context of New York City and New York State, which is where we work, affordable housing is housing that's built through government program, either direct subsidy or some indirect subsidy, and comes with restricted rents. So you have to income qualify to live in those units. So as differentiated from market rate housing, which may have some tax abatement, may have some government involvement, but that doesn't cross the threshold of then needing residents to income qualify. And I just want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing when we talk about affordable housing.
But there's a range within that, and I have it in front of me. It's always helpful for me to look at what we're talking about specifically. And the range of what constitutes affordable housing is for a family of three that makes less than $25,000 a year, $25,770, up to a family of three that makes $142,000 a year. And those are all the income bands that are considered affordable under the mayor's housing plan. The most units that are being built right now are almost 50% up until this summer. And I think there's more that are being targeted towards the lowest income. But up until this summer, it was between $43,000 a year for a family of three and $69,000 a year, which is, as I've talked about before, it's a teacher supporting two kids or something like that.
And Jessica and I are going to continue this on tomorrow's show with another guest joining us. But in our last 2 minutes for now, Ms. Milstein, to the stats that Jessica just gave, the argument that the advocates make is that the for-profit developers, because they need this 15%, 25%, whatever it is off the top, are more geared to building the higher end affordable housing than the lower end affordable housing. And last thing, an article in Crain's in June said the city does not give any special preference to small nonprofit developers for being connected to communities or focusing on buildings for very poor tenants. So I'm just curious, since you represent both sectors, on behalf of your not-for-profit members connected to communities and specializing in low income, shouldn't the city do that?
Well, the city may not directly recognize that, but in almost any community today, as you read about in the papers, it's very difficult to construct anything in most neighborhoods of New York without being tied to the community. So I think increasingly, even our for-profit members are joint venturing with our not-for-profit members and other community groups, because you really, if you're not already in that neighborhood where you're targeting a development opportunity, you need to be tied to in some way, because we create local jobs. Affordable housing isn't only about creating the housing. It throws off a lot of economic development opportunity, and we're investing in neighborhoods. So I think you're seeing more and more joint ventures and really more partnerships, and I think we're seeing more cohesion across the industry.
Jolie Milstein, President and CEO of the New York State Association for Affordable Housing, which represents for-profit and not-for-profit developers of affordable housing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
WNYC's Jessica Gould will continue on the topic tomorrow in our series, A People's Guide to Power, Real Estate Edition.